This is Scott with the Batman Universe podcast, and today I have a very special episode for you. Joining me is professor, psychologist, author, and Batman fan, Dr. Travis Langley. Dr. Langley has authored 14 books on the psychology and analysis of human nature, as relayed through the stories we all love. He's written psychology books on Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Doctor Who, The Walking Dead, Wonder Woman, and today's topic, Batman. This year, the second edition of Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Knight hit shelves, and we're going to get into the psyche of our favorite Caped Crusader. To start things off, did you go to Comic-Con this year?
Yes. I've been going to Comic-Con, except during lockdown when they didn't meet in person. I've gone every year for the last 15 years.
How was it this year?
My year ends and begins with San Diego Comic-Con. I mean, I've been on an academic calendar most of my life, so you kind of think of it that way anyway. But no, it's like now it's a new year. It's all just building up to next summer.
Nice. Were there any highlights for you this year?
Seeing friends I hadn't seen in a while. I mean, that was for me the thing. People say what celebrities are appearing there. It's like, I don't know. I don't go to Hall H. I do my panels. I go to some friends' panels. For the most part, it is about the after hours, hanging out with friends that I haven't gotten to see in other places, and making new friends. The convene in convention is what that's about for me more than anything else.
Nice. I like that. That's a new answer I've heard, and I really appreciate that, because that's, I used to go to like a totally different thing, but it was a writers conference or AWP, and that was just like the conference itself was fine, but it was the after hours where you just like meet up and hang out with your friends from across the country, or just swap the stories or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, you can have many wonderful experiences at the main stuff, especially like a writer's conference. You can pick up interesting tips throughout the days, hear interesting things about people's experiences. And if you go to something like San Diego Comic-Con, you can choose an entire slate of panels along those lines to learn from. Or you can choose a slate of panels where it's about, what cool celebrity can I see? Because, I'll admit, it is fun having a photograph of Bruce Willis that I took myself from way in the back of a San Diego Comic-Con press room once upon a time.
Nice. Jumping into the book, I want to start off like in the introduction. Denny O'Neil offered high praise, citing it as a pivotal book for, an art form that I found interesting. He labeled as post-industrial mythology. How do you feel about comic characters in general as a post-industrial mythology?
I think there's a lot of truth to it. There is a degree to which the characters belong to the fans. Things get out in your consciousness. We have our ideas when fans will argue, Batman kills, Batman does not kill. Each has a different Batman in their head. We've got a myth. Of course, it's myths by copyright and trademark. These are myths that are owned by particular companies, but there is something out there in the popular psyche. There are things that somebody can try to add to the story that won't stick because they don't fit with what the myth is. There's this thing in the popular consciousness, and Denny was a particularly good one about talking about that with characters such as Batman, one of the most famous characters in the world. And people have these ideas, and something about it speaks to people. How do you manufacture a myth in the modern age when people share information a different way? The old myths were shared orally, passed down by people speaking them, telling them, and they would alter with the telling. With these stories, well, they're in print. And we can go back and look and see, you want to argue about something from Batman's history. Well, there it still is in print. But there are these other things to it. They resonate with us in such an important way that some people who aren't fans of them don't necessarily know what it is that speaks to us. And you can say that about something like Star Wars too. Why do fans argue about who shot first? and you know which scene I'm talking about.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
and and to me, it's I wrote a whole chapter on why people argue about that one, but I'm just using that as an example of it. There was something about whichever version spoke to the person that was meaningful, and somebody else can edit the movie. It doesn't change the person's original feeling about it. Half the books I work on are about comic book characters because that's what's particularly interesting to me, and the durability that they have in a way that a lot of these other stories don't have, and the flexibility they have that some of them don't. If a new Harry Potter story is not written by J.K. Rowling or rubber stamp endorsed by it, which apparently the Cursed Child is, it's not really Harry Potter. But you can have your feelings about Harry Potter change because of some things J.K. Rowling's saying about people out there. It doesn't take away from what your original feelings were and why it spoke to you at that time. And so these are things that let us think about the world and people while stepping aside from some of our existing biases and assumptions about the real world.
So it's a good way to put it. And something, when you're talking about how, it used to be an oral tradition and now it's, it's in print. And it's interesting because it got me thinking, when you're talking about that, part of the, one of the things that happens it seems like every 5 years now is there's always like a line-wide, event or change that kind of upsets the status quo a little bit. And like, there are very obvious like business reasons to do that, launching point for new readers, things like that. But also in a way it could serve to like free the character from time. And as we explore these characters and explore ourselves and what we feel or believe in, maybe that's in a way to help adjust that character as
They can do that. They can also reveal the things that fans are still clinging to such and such thing before crisis number 89. And I don't mean year 89, I mean the 89th dadgum universe shaking crisis. Crisis on Infinite Earths was groundbreaking and shook up the whole line and created a lot of opportunities for new stories to be told. But there were things that would keep creeping back in over time because people saw it's like some of these other elements that we'd set aside are still part of what speak to people, and they have their value, they have their place. Sometimes the silly stuff has to be there. Batman sometimes has a dog, sometimes there are these other colors of kryptonite. There are stories to tell with them, even if you just want to we're gonna have that be a non-canon story. Well, you're still telling a daggum story. It is still a story, whether it's canon or not. It is out there for us.
On that note, probably the most recent example I could think of is the New 52, the shift to it, and now the shift very much away from it.
And since then they've done Doomsday Clock and a couple of other stories to keep trying to tweak those things. But yeah, with New 52, that when they restarted them all at number one, even Detective in Action, although those eventually went back to their original numbering, and but they reset for the whole line. The creators, it was just sprung on them. It was Dan DiDio takes it to the board for approval and springs it. Kelly Sue DeConnick was talking about how it's like she found out like 1 month, the next issue of Supergirl is going to be the last, before it all gets reset. It was disheartening to them. Crisis on Infinite Earth, they'd been building up to this for 2 years. All the different creators had time to flesh out their ideas. So it was this collective activity that was exciting and invigorating to them, as opposed to when it just gets inflicted upon the creators. And it's like, will we see more things simply being inflicted upon creators for business decisions, such as not releasing a $90 million movie for reasons that are baffling?
We just talked about that last night on the pod that's coming out Friday.
That's a baffling one, but it does the kind of, one of the reasons stated for that ties into this, though. It was said that it didn't support the vision that the new folks in charge have for the DCEU. So it's like, so they're taking away from the freedom to tell a story. And I mean, if you're playing in the big sandbox, that all this does need to be in the same continuity. Clearly, with Marvel movies, they've got a big old continuity, and somebody that and a filmmaker that wants to tell a story that messes up that continuity for everybody else, that's an issue. That happened with the Ant-Man movie. There were some things he wanted to do that didn't fit what they were doing with that overall, but this was with a universe that was already being established and building and growing, as opposed to one that has never exactly gotten off. I personally thought it was more promising when they're just letting them tell their own stories. The Batman does not have to be set in the same universe as the rest of it. The movie Joker does not have to be, they do not have to worry about where it ties into continuity. They had the freedom to tell, think of them as Elseworld stories or whatever, but they had the freedom to tell those stories in those films. And it seems like a lot of that freedom is being taken away to support a cinematic universe that has never really been developed.
Yeah, no, it's a good point though, and just having these things, just telling their own stories. I was actually interviewing Michael Uslan a week ago.
When you were talking to him when?
About a week ago.
Okay.
And he was,
because I talked to him the week before that.
And we were talking about, just, where it's at now, like on a production level, how you have all these different movies. Obviously it's before the Batgirl news, but he was
and
talking.
Michael is quiet about that.
Yeah,
that's one of those things. There are people who are in positions where they've got to deal with studios and others, and sometimes the thing to pay attention to is what they don't comment on publicly.
Yeah, true. He was just, at the time he was just saying, now, like, years ago when Watchmen came out, it seemed like people he was with, they had a harder time understanding, the time elements of that movie. But we now kind of live in an era where everyone's already used to the multiverse idea, and people just kind of assuming where the groundwork is already there for people to just understand that concept going into, having these movies that aren't necessarily connected.
I know it wasn't that long ago Michael was still talking about his excitement about Michael Keaton's return to the Batman role. And now, will we ever get, it's like, we've got two movies.
Yeah.
The Flash and Batgirl, that he's important in both of these. And they're tied up for different reasons. Warner wishes they'd gone ahead and released the Flash during lockdown instead of just postponing until there's bound to be a better date.
Yeah, true.
Not that they would have any reason to know what was going to come up with Ezra Miller, but
yeah, sad.
We could have seen Michael Keaton as Batman again 2 years ago.
I know. I was very jazzed for that.
Yeah. I make a passing reference to it in some of the updated stuff in Batman and Psychology, just a passing reference, and an end note referring to these movies that still but we might never see. I don't know. We'll see them in some form. I mean, eventually people even got access to Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, and the Donner cut of Superman. Eventually we'll see them, but
that's funny. Yeah, because I was thinking about Fantastic Four yesterday when all the news broke. I was just like hoping some brave soul would do, what some employee did with Fantastic Four.
You've seen Roger Corman's Fantastic Four?
Yes. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
It is. It's funny because my uncle had it on Betamax, and that's how, because he's an old Fantastic Four, fan from years and years back. But yeah, I've seen that. It's a good time. Jumping back to the book, I want to go with I had one more question with the introduction before I jump into it, and I wanted to ask, that in that introduction, there was a note about you and Denny O'Neil having long discussions in a friendship. I wanted to ask, how that developed, and if there was, or what input he had on the book.
It's a weird thing. I honestly don't remember when I first met Denny. That is so weird now that I think about it. I just think it. We had been communicating by email for a while before we finally met in person. Man, that is weird thinking about. I don't remember when I first met Denny. I guess it was because I knew him enough already. We talked on the phone and by email before we finally met in person. Huh. But no, it's and I love talking to Denny. And he was um happy to share his experiences and wisdom and thoughts and to complain about right wingers and talk about a lot of different things. And I mean, the last conversation I had with Denny was particularly long, and it was somewhere in the second hour that I found out why he was rambling more than usual. When he referred to the use of medicinal marijuana, I was like, "Oh, that explains this conversation." Well, after his wife died, he was depressed. Well, that's understandable. But he was a very good person, and he some of the things that he seemed to like about me was the fact that I was bringing my knowledge and experience, my background in psychology, my treatment of things, from scholarly isn't quite the right word. That sounds a little more highfalutin, but of actual analysis and taking things not completely seriously, but treating them with respectfully. That's a better word than taking it seriously, because we still have fun with Batman, but you're respecting the material and looking at how it's meaningful for people in different ways. And he also liked the fact that I got involved with helping the world find out more about Bill Finger. But I Denny was a great person to talk to, and when you get to know somebody when they're older, you'll only know them for so long. It could be a couple years, it could be 10, it could be 20. Michael Uslin's partner, Ben Melniker, he lived to 105.
Wow.
Yeah, and I saw a picture of him walking a granddaughter down the wedding aisle, just not all that long, before that end came. But Denny was a wonderful person. He liked the kind of thing I was doing and liked to support it. So we had we would have conversations just to have conversations, but I had an interview with him for my Joker book, an interview with him for my Wonder Woman book. For folks who know about his time on Wonder Woman, but and there were certain things he told me if I ever did one on Justice League or just any other topic, he'd be happy to help me with those as well. And we had a project we wanted to do together related to the Shadow, but that didn't happen. But when he wrote the introduction for Batman and Psychology, it was before most of that. I had known him for a couple of years at that point, but that introduction, it grew out. He and I were having a conversation in the hallway at New York Comic Con. We were just chatting. Michael was doing his forward to the book. And so I wasn't going to ask somebody else to also do one because, Denny's introduction is essentially a second forward. But it just grew naturally out of the conversation that we were having there at New York Comic Con, and he was happy to do it, and I was very grateful to him so much for contributing that to my first book.
Nice. Yeah, it was, I mean, obviously, I have two questions on it, so it had a lasting impression with me, and that was before I even started the book. But
yeah, I gotta admit, it's an honor and cool and fun, having on the cover of my book, the producer of the Batman movie and the guy who wrote the first comic book I remember reading.
do you remember which issue it was?
Oh, it would have been some really early Batman. I mean, you asked me, when I discovered comic books. We got a photo of me 9 months old holding one of my mom's comics, looking delighted by it. But the earliest ones I remember were some Batman comics that my mom read to me. And I'd looked it up from when that would have been. It's like, oh, those would have been written by Denny. I told Neil Adams once that his art inspired me to learn to read so I could understand why the stories looked so much darker than the Adam West show had led me to expect. And Neil said, 1,000 people have told me that. And we lost Neil not long ago.
Yeah,
we lost him this year.
It's real sad. It's this year has kind of been brutal, kind of across the board. So many creators that have just had
Well,
such a huge impact.
so many creators became big at the time that would put them around the age where, yes, we're gonna see a lot of losses, and Michael Uslan and I, when we're at some reason we do this at New York Comic Con. I think it's because the way their artist alley is laid out. More years than not, we'll get to thinking, it's like, okay, who are the oldest ones here? And it is because we say we want to seek them out. We want to say hi to them. And it's like, I remember us talking one time, and he wasn't sure if Nick Cardy was there. No, I had just talked to Nick Cardy. And then, like, the last time we were talking about it, and it occurred to us that Marv Wolfman was the oldest one there. And it's like, man, we don't think of Marv as being, Marv is Bronze Age. We don't think of him. Yes, we're used to like some of the lingering folks from Golden or Silver Age. Although it's been a little while since somebody from the Golden Age was there now. When the oldest one there was a Bronze Age writer.
Wow. Tense. The first edition of this book came out 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So how did it feel to, revisit this book and update it? And, what were some of the things that fueled the second edition?
Now how it felt like visiting an old friend. It really did. And I've worked on all these other books, but Batman is the one people talk to me about far more than anything else. It is so special. It is something that's always, Batman's always been my hero. And I put a lot of things into it. To me, some of the most important things about psychology and human nature, we're talking about them, the Batman stories in there. Anybody reading that will see this like, oh yeah, this guy loves Batman. But it did. And well, for the last 10 years, things that have come up in the last 10 years. We've had Affleck, we've had Pattinson, we've had Gotham, Titans. Not as many people are going to know about that, but there were a couple little things worth mentioning from Titans in there, and there, it's not just those new stories and the things that have been happening in the comics. Although more of them will come and go. Alfred died. It's been a few years now since Alfred died, and we all still know he'll come back. He'll get better. It's death. It's like a cold. Alfred was dead in the 60s when it wasn't even common to kill people off all the time. And then he came back to life as this purpley spotted guy, the outsider, because he was going to be in the TV show. But there are some issues that have happened, during that time. It's not just, and some of it has to do with those new stories, but not just about the fact that there are new stories. People debate. So one of the two new chapters is Batman's views on killing and weapons. Fans argue about that in ways that they weren't doing 10 years ago, largely because of the Affleck version. And you've gone silent on me, so I have to just fill the gaps.
Sorry.
Ask myself the questions. Oh, okay. No,
there was a noise in the background. I had to.
I didn't hear anything. But fans got to debating the issues of whether Batman does kill, whether Batman should kill. Those are different questions. And to me, that's an argument that can never end. So yes, you can find examples of stories from his 4,000 adventures in 80 years, written by 1,000 different people. Especially if you want to go pulling stuff from the first 2 years of the comic while they were figuring the character out, before editor Whitney Ellsworth said Batman should not kill anybody, and Bill Finger said, he was right. Batman should be good enough. He should never have to do that. And of course you can find examples. It goes into what's my mental Batman as opposed to yours. And so people can argue that, and nobody can exactly win. The philosophical arguments, people argue the logical reasons why Batman should or should not kill. The book Batman in Philosophy and in Batman in Ethics. But the book Batman in Philosophy has this chapter by Mark White in which he goes through different kinds of philosophical arguments, both for and against, specifically killing the Joker. To me, what's interesting are the psychological reasons, because it's like those two things. Does Batman kill? Should Batman kill? People can argue forever. To me, what's interesting are the psychological reasons. Why wouldn't he? And people on either side of the should argument will take into consider that. It's like, why wouldn't someone? They can have their feelings about it. What are or what psychological reasons would figure into a guy embarking on a crime fighting mission would not kill. And then it becomes important again with the Pattinson story recently, but a different way, with this emphasis that he is not going to kill. So I got a whole chapter on that, and then there's this other chapter on Batman as inspiration. I had to take out the humor chapter to make room for it. Although I salvaged a little bit of the first edition's humor chapter here, and I salvaged more of it in a chapter over in Joker. So it's more like it didn't disappear; it just kind of moved over into my Joker book.
Okay.
So I thought that's an obvious place, for me to use something somewhere else and take it out of here, because I want to talk about Batman as inspiration. The first half of the chapter is about him inspiring people within his world. Yeah, but let me bring in some characters that I didn't really have a logical place to say much about, like Cassandra Cain and Duke Thomas, who has been important in the past decade. Other characters in their world had been inspired by Batman, but the latter half, I think, is the more important, when we get into ways in which the fictional character inspires people in the real world, and why a fictional character can inspire someone facing cancer, to find strength as they're engaging in this fight. And there are a number of different people who Batman has been their example on this. Daniel Scott, the one-legged Dance Revolution champion, who he's wearing symbols of Batman as he's in the competition. The number of people who have told me, and it's not just Batman, but it's the number of people who have told me that specific fictional characters and stories help them break a chain of suicidal thinking, of suicidal ideation. Paul Dini, who wrote for Batman the Animated Series, created Harley Quinn. He was brutally injured when
Uh-oh. You still there? There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Internet crashed. We were talking about
the internet crashed.
Yes,
it seems like no time passed at all.
We'll see. I just want them to know, so when they edit this, they'll edit this part out. Okay. So we're talking about Batman as inspiration, and
Yes.
how he inspires people to go through such challenges in life, and some of their darkest days, even we were talking about, and just how it's oh no, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it occurred to me, he's editing this part. You're just talking again, so we're still in the edited out part. So the power to inspire people can come from a lot of different places. It can come from fictional characters. We grow up learning from stories. We learn values from stories when we're a kid. We learn lessons, from children's books, teaching us, yes, things about counting and colors, but also cooperating, caring about other people. Also reasons to go the heck to sleep. But we are inspired by stories from so early in our life. We are inspired by characters who don't even exist. We're inspired by people in our lives, yes, but we actually know the fictional characters better than we know most real people. And because they're fictional, if something happens, some new story comes up that's like, oh, that doesn't work at all. It's like, Batman shouldn't be doing that. Okay, in real life, if your hero, like your grandpa, turns out to have been, secretly a drug addict. I'm not saying your grandpa was. I'm saying if your grandpa turns out to have been secretly a drug addict, that colors everything you've ever had to think about that grandpa. If somebody does that with a superhero in a story, that does not necessarily change everything you've ever thought. It's like, nope, my hero is the one who was in the stories before that. It is not what redefines. There are some characters who get redefined by something like that, like Green Arrow sidekick Speedy. That's going to come up forever regarding him. It makes him more interesting than he used to be. But it didn't keep coming up with Harry Osborn, in the comics. It was a specific story and did not come up over and over. But somebody has a story in which Batman does something heinous. You can be, well, screw that writer. That's not my Batman. You can't go, screw that news reporter. That's not my Lance Armstrong when Armstrong gets caught doping.
True.
So the fictional characters can stay within, they have a resilience that real people don't necessarily have. And there's a purity to the story and the point and the value. It's been pointed out, it's like, Mark Twain and others have said fiction has to make sense. It's got to get to the point and have truth more immediately than a lot of real things do. And your face is frozen. Oh, you blinked. Okay. You just slowed down.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I just wanted to
good.
make sure that
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure we weren't wasting your
No.
time.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, because your image is getting choppy, so I just wanted to make sure things are okay. All right. The character, why Batman inspires a lot of different reasons. Why that particular character? Some of it is because he's the superhero with no superpowers. Is this guy who decided, I shall become a bat. He decided, I will do things. I will help people. I will keep others from going through what my family went through. He takes his pain and channels it into something constructive, something useful. When in real life, if you're walking through the worst part of town and you're kind of nervous about the people around there, you stepped into the scary looking biker bar. Your best hope may be not that a Boy Scout comes in to help you, but that one of the other bikers tells others, lay off of him, leave him alone. It's like sometimes it takes the person who has the darkness to make us feel safest.
True.
In the most dangerous places.
Diving into Batman's, psyche specifically, I noticed in chapter 4, you have a great section about, his identity.
That's the trauma chapter. That's the trauma chapter.
Yeah. And, which is the
that
true
the trauma
mass
chapter or the mass chapter?
I believe.
Oh, that's the mass chapter. Okay.
The mass chapter. Yeah. And so, you go through, talk about like how, Bruce and Batman and some are both, masks, and there's de-individuation and disinhibition that play in there. But the point I'm getting at is, near the end is when you cue readers in that, Batcave Bruce, the one talking freely beneath Wayne Manor, is his truest self. And I wanted to ask, how did you, what was kind of the thought process that led you to that realization?
Well, that's one of those where, this book comes out of, something I've been thinking about my whole life and looking at the storytelling. In some ways, it may harken partly back to the way John Byrne turned Superman into this 3-part character that he really had not been before Crisis on Infinite Earths, just by giving him living parents. And it had always been that the Kents were dead. But Byrne made it that the Kents were alive, and suddenly we had to have this third side to Superman. There's the public Superman, and then there's the Clark Kent act, but then he could also be himself around John and Martha Kent. And we got to see this fleshed out 3-part character. And with Batman, we have these debates over and over. Who's the real character, Batman and Bruce Wayne? And different people take different perspectives. To some, it seems like, well, it's obvious Batman. He thinks of himself that way. You have him hold the lasso of truth, ask him who he is. He says, I'm Batman. He doesn't say I'm Bruce Wayne. And I saw somebody disagreeing with that the other day. They thought that was terrible writing. It's like, well, no, he's not just Batman, but he thinks of himself that way. But there is this Bruce Wayne act. We see that obviously, but there's also a Batman act. When he says Batman can't show that he's injured, Batman has to be larger than life. He puts in this extra scary aspect to Batman to intimidate people. That stuff's in Act 2. So there is a public Batman as well. And we probably see him truest when he's down in the Batcave, the masked back, probably with a cup of coffee, talking to Alfred and maybe the kid, though he's less guarded when it's just one. Kevin Conroy and I were talking about this one time, and his feeling is that Batman's truest to himself when he's alone, when there's nobody to have any kind of act for. And now that may be totally true, but we're not seeing any kind of interaction to do anything with that. And so we see him when he's down there in the cave at the computer, free from the different kinds of pretense.
True. On the flip side, I found it interesting, that you, when we go into talk, or when you go into talking about the Joker, you divided him into 5 distinct beings, and I found that extra interesting, especially
that's period 5 periods in his history, and Grant Morrison puts out they can be broken down further too, but there are 5 main periods in his history. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, that's okay. That's a good way to put it.
I guess the names the names I give to each of those periods do reflect an aspect of himself as a person. They're not just names for periods of time. As Agent of Chaos, the King of Arkham Asylum, the Clown Prince of Crime. So yeah, each of those 5, I name for him, but different aspects of him as a person. That's true.
And then you have, I was going to lead into, you have a whole separate book on the Joker. You did mention it earlier, and is there anything you can tell us a little bit about, the Joker book, that kind of separates it from the Batman book? I know you said you moved some chapters, and obviously it's more Joker focused, but.
Yeah, and that one, I wrote about 2/3 of the book. I have other people contributing chapters to that one as well. Other psychologists, especially the last chapter. I've got a dozen different people weighing in, talking about different kinds of therapy. It's like, would this type of therapy help the Joker? No. With that one? No. With that one? No, that would make him worse. It's actually shown a group therapy can make psychopaths worse because some of them will pick up on, it's like, oh, this is what they want to hear me say, more easily in group therapy than other settings. But then the latter part of that chapter, we go into, well, what about Harley? When she's in a state and ready to grow and so forth. And we would go through, it's like, well, yeah, some of these could work with her. For a long time, people had kept asking more than anything else, if I would do a book on the Joker. It varies. There are always people asking, would you ever do a book on such and such? Would you ever do a book on such and such? And often they name things that, oh yeah, those are on the list of things I'm eventually going to do. Like this year, the 2 people have been asking me about more than anything else are Stranger Things and Spider-Man.
I saw Stranger Things forthcoming, right?
Yeah, Stranger Things Psychology, Life Upside Down comes out in February. And if I'm doing the Spider-Man book, it comes out in May. Got
a loaded schedule there. That's a lot of writing.
Well, I'm not writing them all. With Stranger Things, I co-authored 1 chapter, and then I wrote my introductions. With Spider-Man, I'm writing a lot in that one. So with Stranger Things, my role is far more gathering the different people and herding the nerds and working with them to develop ideas and see how they fit together. Sometimes it involves helping some figure out their ideas, helping them write it in a way that works for the general audience, because I want these things. Yeah, it would be great for some to be used in a classroom, but that is absolutely not close to the forefront of my thoughts. Impressing other scholars. We are using these to have fun talking about these characters and to teach psychology of real human nature to the world. And to me, that's more important than impressing somebody on my CV, which is really long anyway. So the well, I mean, I include everything, like including all my Psychology Today blog pieces, because I need to keep track of them somewhere. But with the Joker, people asked about that so much because of the Batman book, and for a while I resisted because something was missing. Obviously, we can fill a book on the psychology of the Joker, but it's so speculative because we don't know for sure what goes on inside his head. And for storytelling purposes, that's best. It's great that we don't know for sure what his definite background is. In The Dark Knight, the first time he tells his background, okay, it's interesting, but I'm kind of disappointed they're giving him a real background. But then when he tells that second lie that is completely incompatible with the first one, it's like, oh, okay, we're taking the Alan Moore approach. Sometimes I remember my past one way, sometimes I have another. If I have to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice. And it's okay, we do not know so many things about him, and that's what makes him the greatest challenge for Batman, because he's the hardest for Batman to predict, to know which aspect of the Joker he's dealing with this time. But then I was having lunch with my acquisition editor and the publicist at the publisher, and the publicist said, well, what do you make about the Joker and Harley? Because I was telling her about my reluctance on the book. It's like, well, yeah, we do know a lot about what goes on in Harley's head. It's still mainly about the Joker. And while we were at lunch, I said the subtitle would have to make it clear that it was about, and that's the fastest a subtitle has ever come to me. The subtitle on the Joker psychology is Evil Clowns and the Women Who Love Them. So the title makes it clear it's mainly about the Joker. The subtitle says Harley's in there too. And yeah, it's longer than there's more content in that book than there is in Batman.
Wow.
Well, so I wrote about 2/3 of the book, but it's enough. There's enough additional material to it. It's equivalent for me. It was equivalent of about 90% of what I wrote for Batman and Psychology. So I wrote a book's worth, but then I have these things from other people because I thought it was important to bring in clinicians, people with different perspectives, forensic psychologists, when we're doing the psychology of the criminal. And the time I spent looking at some of the things on the psychology of the world's worst criminals to get a feel for what fits in the Joker. After we were done with that one, I had to take a break. I had a 6-month break, after at that point 5 years of continuously putting out these books with other people. There had been a 2-year break after Batman. And then I had to have that break. And then thanks to lockdown and messing up the publishing industry and everything else, that 6-month break became a 2-year break. And then I did the second edition of Batman and Psychology. Now we're going with the anthologies again.
Awesome. There's one chapter where you talk about Carl Jung and shadow selves, and you delve into this idea of anima and animus. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Okay, so Carl Jung was a psychiatrist who was one of the early ones getting involved with Freud and his psychodynamic movement. And he and Freud correspond, were very close for 4 or 5 years. Then they had a big falling out, as Freud did with a whole lot of the people around him. But Jung, one thing he was interested in, aside from Freud's look at how life experiences played a role in the unconscious part of your mind, Jung looked at some things universal throughout humankind. He studied myths and stories throughout the world and found that certain themes emerge everywhere. The concept of a hero emerges in every culture, no matter how far apart they are on the planet, how far they were removed through history and so forth. There are certain concepts that emerge everywhere. There's something natural about them. He felt there's something deep in the inherited unconscious mind, regardless of why these themes emerge. They do emerge. And the shadow that you're talking about is an archetypal, inherited in the collective unconscious, as Jung saw it, this archetypal sense of our own dark side. We often think of it as our evil part, and in many stories that is it. Someone has to confront their own darkest aspects before they can move on. Luke Skywalker has to have the hallucinatory fight on the swamp planet, with an imaginary Darth Vader, and then see his own head in the helmet. He has this as part of him confronting his own shadow self or representative of that. It was George Lucas. He was deliberately pulling in Jungian ideas and Joseph Campbell's ideas. And then ever since George Lucas, a lot of others have deliberately done these things that Jung and Campbell had said had developed naturally without people deliberately following the model that Campbell in particular outlined with the hero's journey. With that shadow, Jung felt that part of growing as a person involves confronting different aspects of yourself, taking a look at your own persona, your public face, your public mask, and looking at that as such, and thinking about why we act different ways in public. You're going deeper in yourself with the anima and animus, and even deeper into confronting that shadow. And with Batman, we've got somebody who has already gone through this hero's journey. He's gone through this confrontation with his own dark side to find a way to work with it to make himself stronger and to do good for other things, to take his anger, to take his own worst qualities and channel them into something good out in the world. He does not think of himself as a good person. There's this wonderful line from the Hush storyline, in which, and it's narrative because they don't do thought bubbles most of the time, but it's just narrative. Him thinking about how, Clark, Superman, has the ability to incinerate you from 1,000 miles away, but he won't, because deep at heart, Clark is a good person. And then he adds this thought, and deep at heart, I'm not. He doesn't think of himself as a good person. But he's taking these things and using them to, yes, take out his anger on criminals. Every thug he slugs is a pitiful substitute for the one who killed his parents. But the first part of the mission, and most writers seem to get this, is to keep other people from going through what he went through. If he has to choose between saving a person and getting that criminal, he's going to save that person. He'll try to do both, but he's going to go save that person. The Punisher, you're not so sure if he's going to go save that person or not. He's focused on getting that criminal. For the Punisher, the punishment is, the attack on the criminal is the first mission. For Batman, that's not it, despite how he thinks of himself. But he's taken his worst qualities and putting them to work. So he's working with his own shadow self. So he is a shadow character. He is a shadow figure, which automatically gives him this complexity that so many of the other superheroes don't have. And because he is psychologically complex, he is defined by his psychology, and its enemies all have to be too.
True. No, and that's an interesting point too, comparing him and contrasting him with, other heroes, and kind of, I think, feeds into, what you were saying earlier about, Batman as a figurehead that, we're all attracted to, as people, as fans and, readers, and obviously moviegoers. But, I noticed too in the same chapter, you position Catwoman as his anima, and so that leads me to the question, are you a fan of Batman and Catwoman together, or is there another relationship with Batman that you prefer?
As well as my Why the Cat chapter makes clear, Catwoman is his love story, as she is. The others that they've tried over the years, there are problems. The person who is another superhero, when he doesn't think of himself as a good person, he doesn't feel completely comfortable with the person he thinks of as a good person. But then, there was a story, Mike Gold pointed this out. There's a story in the 70s where Batman stops and thinks at one point, wondering what it says about himself, wondering why his main interests are in these bad girls he ought to lock up. So we're talking specifically Selena and Talia. And Batman didn't have an answer. But story-wise, it also works because that line of law keeps them apart, keeps it where they can always be, they can be these lovers forever separated by something, without having to, it's like, okay, well, they did it, they hooked up, they got married, now what? Which eventually, a deal with Mephisto to save Aunt May will undo for Spider-Man. New 52 undoes for Superman. Although later they're married again. It's there are stories to tell, but it's a different kind of story. And the story of a relationship, the story of a marriage can work very well for plenty of these heroes. You know, the elongated man got married in his second story, and he's most associated with his relationship with Sue. But Batman, he has to be this guy who goes back and forth between work with these others. No, I'm a loner. That Lego Batman movie is one of the best character analyses ever. But and he there are times when he isolates himself from everybody, and you can't do that very well with a wife in your household. That's not going to make for a successful relationship. And so with that line of law keeping him and the bad girls apart, but they can't be too bad. So if they're murderers, it's like, well, that's not what he can maintain an ongoing relationship. It's like, oh, I'll let her get away because I like her. It's like, she killed people. It's like, okay, Selina's not murdering people. So I mean, her first couple of appearances, each of her first couple of appearances back in the 40s, he accidentally lets her escape at the end of the story. It's like, oops. The second one is like, Robin is like, right, you accidentally let her go. And so he was always interested. It was always there throughout their entire history. There are times, I mean, she disappeared from the comics for a decade because she didn't fit what the Comics Code Authority wanted. And there are times when other writers were struggling to figure out what to do with her. They really had a rhythm in the 90s onward when they reached this anti-hero approach with her. That she can be a little better sometimes, a little worse sometimes, but they really hit the right rhythm with her. She is what appeals to Batman while having this thing that will always keep them apart. I saw the other day where somebody had tweeted that they used to think Talia was the one he ought to be with until they read Batman and Psychology by Travis Langley, and then the guy said, and now I'm a Catwoman believer.
Nice. I've always been team, Catwoman, but the book helps solidify that, why I'm on that line, and also one of my favorite films is Batman Returns, and, Michelle Pfeiffer really killed it as Catwoman and kind of turned me on to the character.
In terms of her background, she's this secretary. She's not the one who's always been the criminal, but Michelle Pfeiffer, she's so darn good in that movie. And we've not had a truly terrible Catwoman. We've definitely had some. We've had some who are better than others, yeah. But we've and it also depends on the story they're telling. It's like Michelle Pfeiffer was fantastic in that particular version, and Zoe Kravitz, she really fit what they were doing with her in the Batman. Because Adam West, he had multiple Catwomen. He had three different Catwomen.
I think what makes it apart is, you mentioned the secretary. It's just, we can all relate to having, feeling like, the world sometimes is just like crapping on us, rough day at the office, you come home, you have some angry voicemails from your mom or, and a soon to be ex,
and each version of Selina's background, the secretary in Gotham, or the kid who grew up poor and orphan in Gotham. Now we know in Batman Returns, Selina had a mom because she was leaving a message for her mom and talking to her on the phone. But normally Selina is an orphan. Grew up on the bad side of Gotham. Either way, it's some different aspect of life in Gotham in that contrast with Bruce Wayne's life, as opposed to this daughter of an international terrorist who she's not inherently part of Gotham. Selina is inherently part of Gotham, and that makes her another contrast to Bruce Wayne himself, something that both unites them and divides them, even in their relationship to the city.
True. I have a heavy philosophical question for you. Maybe we'll see.
Oh, well, that's from Mark White. He does Batman and philosophy. Okay, what are we trying?
Earlier, we were talking about, the audience and, what attracts people to this character and everything. And that was one of my later questions in my list, but I had a follow-up to that, in the sense of, we're now in the era of, the MCU, superhero movies are huge and booming. Do you think, you know, in the era now, these things are doing so well because we're collectively searching for something.
Mhm. We're always searching for something. You know, and when Superman first appears on the scene in 1938, people were looking for heroes that could save them from problems that seemed like they had no easy solution. You know, when gangsters seemed to have been winning throughout the 20s and 30s, and the world was heading to war, we had such complicated things. You know, we wanted somebody to step up and do the right thing, but you couldn't see who could possibly do these things. And here emerges Superman with the powers that let him do this. Batman with the resources that he has. Although we also know you take all those sources away, plant him in the middle of nowhere, he's still Batman. I had said that for years before The Dark Knight Rises, and then Nolan did it. He took away the money, planted him out in the middle of nowhere, and he still emerges as Batman. Who cares how he got back to Gotham after that? He's Batman. He figured it out.
Shipping crate. I don't know.
That's a good one. These heroes, these stories that we're drawn to, they appeal to different things we're seeking at different times. We see some definite changes in superhero stories post 9/11. The whole MCU has definitely has a post 9/11 influence on the kinds of stories. We want heroes with greater depth so we can believe them. You know we have to see more humanity. You know, not just somebody step up and I have the ability to do the right thing and this is what we're going to do. You need somebody who we need to know that some of them have some conflicts about it, that they're doing the right thing because they're human. They're doing the right thing even though it's hard, you know, doing the right thing even though some things scare them and that they have worries. So we need this greater complexity and humanity for us to be able to believe our heroes in this age of communication. There's so many different things that are shaping why we want stories the way we are. Why now every superhero has a tragic backstory. That used to not be the case. You know, they did not all have these. It starts getting inserted. It used to be Flash was the only member of the Justice League who had both of his parents alive during his adulthood until Flashpoint in the New 52. But people are so used to it through the Flash TV show, they just take it for granted that it's always been that his mom was murdered and his dad was, you know, locked up for it. It's like, no, Barry Allen did the right thing because he was the kind of person who was ready to do the right thing. You know, he didn't have this tragic backstory. You know, Hal Jordan didn't have his dad die in a plane explosion right in front of him until Jeff Johns inserted it. That was actually before the new, right, a little before the New 52. But those things had not been in their backstory. We want greater complexity. We want to see the hero's pain. Maybe because we're sadistic, or maybe because we want to know that it means something to the hero when they do these things. You know, they're not doing it for the glory. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do. They're doing it even though it's hard and hurts them.
It's a good way to frame it, you know, the meaning and everything. So though I do still like, you know, the non-painful, boring sides of heroes where, you know, maybe their parents don't die, or, you know, I'm one of those people, I'm not big on the CW, but I do like Superman and Lois, and I like the idea that there's this family drama in the background going on, you know, and it's just kind of the everyday boring stuff. But so Superman's, you know, being Superman, but he's also like being a dad. So
Well, I referred to John Byrne's reboot of Superman in the 80s. You know, he took out one of the more tragic elements when he gave the Kents back to him. And Superman, even though he was from a doomed planet, he doesn't know it till he's older in almost every version of the story. Now I know in the 70s, you know, he could remember everything, but he had super memory, so he could remember all of it. But no, as generally, you know, the first time when he first finds out about Krypton in the old comics, and when he's trying to track down the origin of Kryptonite. You know, he's an adult and already Superman before he finds out where he comes from. usually since John Byrne's time, it has been that it's in his teens, when John shows him the ship and he finds out he's an alien, and he still doesn't know the details of it. So there's this mystery about it, but not this pain to it. If you are an adult and before you find out the tragic background, that you came from, it's like a history lesson. It can be painful finding out it's like they're all gone. There is no hope of ever meeting any of them or anything like that. But it's not the kind of trauma that you remember the event itself. The person who is fleeing from the Nazis and has that personal account, it affects them in a way that it cannot affect the child who simply knows that it happened to them. Still affect that kid and be something that's in there in the life, but it's not the same experience at all. It's not the personal trauma. Superman did not have the personal trauma of Krypton exploding. He found out about it a lot later. Batman sees his parents murdered before his eyes. 6 months into the run of the character, Bob and Bill, brainstorm about what motivates this guy, and they decided there's probably nothing more traumatic than that. And Spider-Man is honestly the next big twist on that. When Stan and Steve, have it where he's got this guilt, about Uncle Ben getting killed, but because he didn't stop the burglar himself, that really is the next big twist in the superhero tragedies.
Yeah, no, I loved that too with Spider-Man. The idea that it was kind of doing things for selfish reasons at first, and then he gets this drastic life event that changes. I think that kind of speaks to the power of why that character is so popular too. Is there's that lasting, blaming oneself, in a different way than like Batman would, as a kid when he goes through sometimes his memories or however he's being written in when they retell his origins.
Yeah, with Spider-Man, and it is a contrast to Batman, so we're still on Batman, but with Spider-Man, he starts off like, if you suddenly got superpowers, your first thought would not be, hey, I'm gonna go take this and fight some crime. Much earlier would be, ooh, how can I pay my bills with this? If you suddenly had telekinesis, like if I suddenly had the ability to make things move 1 inch, I know what I would be doing with that superpower. I'd be at a casino moving a ball on a roulette wheel. I'd do some research, make sure it's a crooked casino that deserves it. But that is not about justice. That is about making sure I don't feel guilty about what I'm doing. That's I think that's the more common thing. Him taking those powers and using it to try to help himself have a better life is a very normal human reaction. I was just proofreading yesterday a draft by someone contributing to the Spider-Man book, and where he's talking, that's exactly what he's talking about for that chapter, is the fact that Pete did not start off choosing to be a crime fighter, and the very normal human motivation that was involved in what he was doing. Whereas Batman decides, I shall turn myself into a larger than life figure. Superman and Spider-Man, they get powers. They did not do anything to make themselves get the powers. They had the super already, and they decided what to do with it. Superman, because he's raised by the best parents on earth. We know from alternate world stories, if he's raised by a bad guy, he's going to be a bad guy. He's going to embody the whatever ideals his parents trained them, because he's a good boy, even in a bad world. Whereas, Spider-Man, it's a little later before he decides, to do the right thing. With Batman, it's the other way around. He has decided, I'm going to embark on this mission to fight crime, and I will turn myself into somebody who can do that.
True. So we have been running way over time, but I have.
Oh, this is long overdue. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised we hadn't done this before.
Yeah, there we were.
Well, you brought it up before, but I said so often I have conflicts.
Yeah, no, originally, we just started, like I just started taking these on not too long ago.
Yeah.
So the interviews, but yeah, it has been long overdue.
Yeah.
My last question before, I wrap things up. You have a very busy schedule, but do you still find time to read comics? And if so, what's on your pull list?
Um, now I don't live anywhere near a comic shop, so I don't have a pull list. I have some things I subscribe to. I subscribe to Batman, Harley Quinn, Catwoman. There's still Batman related comics. Some others that it's like Keeping Up with Spider-Man. When Squirrel Girl has a series, I'm usually reading that. I love Squirrel Girl. The greatest strategist in the Marvel universe is Squirrel Girl. DCU has Batman. The MCU, her superpower, even beyond her ability to communicate with squirrels, is her ability to strategize. I love Squirrel Girl. That's a fun one. Yeah. Harley, the stories can be very fun. They can be very dark and rambly, and it just depends on the writer. Writers have she's got it's not just the anti-hero thing of Catwoman. Harley has been much more villainous at times, and there's this greater uncertainty of her own identity, and so the writers vary a lot more in what they do with her character. These are some of the ones I love. I love the one that Batman Urban Legends, when those come out. I love the mix of stories that they have in those. And I've been the Rob. I keep giving you Batman related stuff, and that is a lot of what I read in the comics these days.
Well, we have a
Other
whole
stuff I'll
site
catch up,
full of
and I love
Batman
reading the
people.
old stuff. Well, I've got the Marvel Online subscription, so I'll read a lot of older things through them. That's I want to read the new Jessica Jones stuff. I've been a fan of Jessica Jones since Alias #1. I got her comic long before there was a Netflix show to make the rest of the world find out about her. I've always enjoyed the Jessica Jones stories.
I've read Pulse, and I really enjoyed Pulse. My wife is actually a huge Jessica Jones fan. We have all the books. I just have been lazy in reading them, other than outside of Pulse. So, but
and Pulse is at a point where she's gone through the foundational stuff. She's at a more stable point in her life in Pulse.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's none of the real Purple Man stuff or anything like that.
Yeah.
But with that said, I want to thank you for your time.
Sure.
I'm glad that we got together. Finally, we had a chance to chat. It was an absolute pleasure, and you are a wealth of knowledge. I encourage fans of Batman and comics to pick up a copy of Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night. The link can be found below, so it's right there. Thank you again, and I hope everybody listening has enjoyed this episode.